Hello and welcome to Be Emboldened's live stream on the Trust Me documentary. I'm Natasha Fish, your board chair, Naomi, our founder, and Lindsey, our author, apologist, and resident researcher extraordinaire. And we're going to dive into this topic about the documentary that's focused on the FLDS community, which is the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints religious group based out of Utah. It's like right on the border, Utah, Arizona. So we're going to be talking about that documentary that was just recently released and just the topic on a broader sense, coming from our perspective, which is one of compassion, of research, of how does this apply and fit into our current day and age and the demographics that we work with at Be Emboldened, spiritual abuse survivors, and hoping that you bring your questions. And so any questions are welcome in the chat at any point, and we'll get to those as we can. But as usual, we'll start off with an overview, depending on how you're coming into this conversation. Maybe you've seen the documentary, maybe you haven't. But Lindsey is going to give us an overview about FLDS and the documentary and what we need to know before we dive into this conversation.
Yeah, so the Trust Me documentary came out about a month ago. I've watched it so many times I've forgotten at this point, but it is about a sect of the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. So the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints are not the Latter-day Saints mainstream, right? So I'll take you all the way back to like 1890. So in 1890, there was a manifesto that came out from the mainstream LDS church that prohibited new plural marriages. And that was a big shift from what they had been doing. As we know, they had been at that point practicing polygamists or plural marriages, where one man would have several wives. All in the name of getting to a higher level of heaven. But in 1890, the mainstream LDS church released its first manifesto saying no more new plural marriages. And then they followed that up with a second manifesto, and that happened in 1904. And that said that there would be excommunication of members who were practicing plural marriage. So now it was no longer no new plural marriages, but now you can't even practice plural marriage. And that's where the mainstream LDS is today. When those manifestos came down, there was a split of the LDS church into there's mainstream now and then the FLDS, or the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. They've had a couple of prophets, which we'll talk about in a minute, but they've had a couple of prophets lead them in the last 120 so years. But perhaps the most famous is Warren Jeffs. Warren Jeffs is the son of former prophet Rulon Jeffs, who is, he was the prophet for several years. And when he died, Warren Jeffs sort of took over. The other thing we need to recognize is that when there was a split with the FLDS and mainstream LDS, there was a lot of tension, and also the laws, right? So the laws are anti-plural marriage in the United States, but they moved down to a place called Short Creek in Trust Me. And often when you hear FLDS members talk about Short Creek, they might call it the Crick. So you might hear them say the Crick, but Short Creek is on the border of Arizona and Utah. And so I'm sure people have seen videos from the Crick, and it usually is illustrated by women in plain dresses, right, with their hair pulled back, very modest and whatnot. Okay, so fast forward, we've got the Crick, we've got FLDS. Eventually, Warren Jeffs in 2004. He is the prophet at this point. His dad had died in, I think, like 2002. He starts expelling certain men from the FLDS and taking their wives or assigning their wives to other men who were in his good favor. So we had this huge process of a bunch of men and boys being pushed out of the FLDS. This is talked about in the Trust Me documentary, which is why I'm bringing it up. In case you heard the term Lost Boys, that's generally referring to the men and boys who were pushed out of the FLDS church. Either they were on Warren Jeff's bad side, or they did something that Warren Jeffs didn't like, or they challenged the prophet, which is kind of a big no-no in the FLDS. And even in the mainstream Latter-day Church, we don't challenge the prophet. All that to say, Warren Jeffs is now in prison. The topic of this conversation is not really about the raid that happened, but ultimately there were some charges placed against Warren Jeffs for having child brides. And so he was imprisoned and is imprisoned, and he is still the acting FLDS prophet. So the FLDS members are supposed to be listening to Warren Jeffs and what he has to say. While in prison, Warren Jeffs said, you can no longer get married, have sex, or have children. This is a big problem in the FLDS church because in FLDS doctrine, typically it's accepted that a woman will probably have a baby every year. And having babies and being married is what gets you exalted up into the higher levels of heaven. And you can't do that if you're not getting married or having children. So this was kind of a big deal. And some men, a couple who were featured in the documentary, Trust Me, went against the prophet. The main one is featured in the Trust Me documentary. His name is Sam Bateman. He is the prophet of the Samuelites, not the FLDS. So the Samuelites are a break-off offshoot group of the FLDS who believe that they should still be getting married, still be having babies, and all of those things. Over the course of this, Samuel said that Warren Jeffs had actually died in prison and was able to convince about 50 followers that this had happened and that the government and the media was lying about Warren Jeffs being alive. And so now that Warren Jeffs is so-called dead, he's not really. Samuel has this opportunity to declare himself the prophet of this group. Like I said, about 50 people or so joined his cause. He ended up taking on many wives, about 20 wives, having several children. That brings us almost to today. During the course of that time, we had a couple named Christine and Tolga, Christine Marie and Tolga. They moved to the Crick. Christine is she is a survivor herself of religious abuse, and she brings her own kind of knowledge. She has a PhD. I think it's something in psychology. I can't remember the exact title, and has a real interest in making sure that what happened to her doesn't happen to other, particularly women and children. And so they moved to Short Creek and didn't intend on creating this kind of documentary, although Tolga is a videographer and has a lot of skill in that area. So they've been recording things since they arrived. They eventually met Sam Bateman, and that is the footage that we see in this Trust Me documentary. It's because of their work, mainly Christine's work undercover, really infiltrating this group, not joining the group, but being a party that they trusted, so much even so that one of their babies is named after her, right? So really garnering a lot of trust. And ultimately, Samuel started making confessions that were either mostly recorded, statements that were ultimately given over to the FBI, which then resulted in Sam being arrested. And now he is ultimately in prison as well. So that's like the overview. There's a lot to unpack. But now you kind of have the history of how the Samuelites came about, recognizing that it's not the FLDS really that we're talking about. It's a sect or an offshoot of the FLDS who believe that Samuel is the prophet And it's not really that many of them anymore. Maybe 10 to 12 of them still support Samuel as their prophet.
Whew. Thank you so much, Lindsey. So much history to cover. You did a great job. Yeah, so I just want to know your comments, maybe from Naomi, about kind of that, how that went down. Like that we have this continuing break off and sex continuing to break off. And that's just what strikes me, maybe that people might want to hear about.
Sure. So for this to happen, there's kind of this both and element of like, oh my goodness, it's not over. Warren has been in prison for like 15 years now, and it's like this still isn't done. And for anyone who has tracked a bit, we've known that he has still been, or he's been silent as of, I don't know if that has changed now, but he had stopped giving direction to the FLDS in Short Creek. So he had kind of radio silence for years, an extended period of time, which is highlighted in the Trust Me documentary as well. And that kind of gave more room for Samuel to jump in and make up a narrative for why he's gone silent. He's dead, which is that's the narrative that they came up with. And to then be able to step in as someone who is now hearing from, the great beyond, from the other side, and claiming to hear from Warren specifically, even calling him Uncle Warren, which would also show a fondness towards him. And so there's sort of this both and of, oh my goodness, this isn't over. And of course, the emotions that go along with that, alongside the, well, yeah, because this is what happens. This is what happens. When a leader's removed, the group doesn't necessarily dissolve. And I've lived that in my own family. Leader, my father passed away. The group didn't dissolve. It did go on pause for a while in a lot of ways. And then eventually someone new stepped in and kept it going and made changes and all the things. And so this is what we see happen. So again, there's kind of this both and to it. It's all tragic. And so when I think about one note I made while you were talking, Lindsey, was, for the prophet to convince people of lies actually really isn't that hard to do.
No.
This actually isn't really that difficult because everyone's kind of primed for it already. They've been in this for a long time. We're talking about like more of a recurrence than something brand new. It's a different person. It's packaged a bit differently. We've got a couple, a hop, skip, jump that maybe we have to take, but we're all like kind of primed and ready for this. If we are people who have been a part of this, part of this religious group. So for someone else to step in and to start a following, and I will say too, it was a small following in terms of the number of men connected, because there were 3 men who came in as well as Samuel.
Yes.
Right? So
he pulled in 3 men.
Yes. So 4 men in total, including Samuel. And so, but the thing is, that's a lot of women when we're talking about plural marriages, right? And we're talking about not only the wives, but we're talking about the daughters. And so Samuel then took over the relationship with these 3 men's wives and their daughters, and not just their daughters that were of age, their daughters who were not of age. And so when we think about, though, how does someone get that kind of power? Everybody is looking for somebody to know what to do because they're used to being told what to do. And this isn't low stakes. These are the ultimate stakes. How do I still make it to heaven? How do I still make it to within this theology? How am I making it to these higher levels of the afterlife that I'm hoping to achieve? How do I still do that? Especially when I've been told I can no longer do the things that are going to help me to do that, which is to marry and to have children, etc. So it was a perfect situation, honestly, for someone like Samuel, who was ambitious and who it sounds like also had maybe a chip on his shoulder, maybe isn't the right way to say it. I think his own sense of insecurities of having been left out, having not really fit in. He wasn't really accepted among everyone else. So for him to kind of pivot off and be like, well, I'm just going to create this on my own. How much was premeditated? How much was not? There's always a degree of question there. I feel pretty confident saying that I saw some pretty premeditated things. I think some things were pretty premeditated. It does get blurry from a psychological standpoint when someone just wants something so much. At what point do they really believe it's okay? My father, again, is an example of that. And to what degree do they know better? And that can it's like, well, do we believe that morality is a real thing? Do we believe that we have an innate sense of rightness and wrongness as those who are image bearers of our Lord? And so, like, I have a hard time buying into we don't know not to be with a 9-year-old. I have a hard time believing that that's true. So I think there's some really ugly, out of control desires that were just played into, and that narratives were made to get what was wanted. And it is horrific. It is absolutely disgusting. And it is some of the most wicked that we can see. I'm saying that from the prophet standpoint. I am not saying that from the women who were coerced into this, who were groomed for it from childhood, and then were forced into situations that they were completely unequipped to be able to navigate.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I don't want to interrupt you, but I think that's an important point because you have to remember that Rulon Jeffs, when he was leading the FLDS, had the mantra "Keep Sweet." So there's another documentary actually available on Netflix if this is sort of whet your appetite and you want to learn more, that covers the rise of Warren Jeffs, really. But the first part of it, there's a subtitle. I think it's "Keep Sweet, Obey and Pray," but it might be "Pray and Obey." Pray and Obey. That's it. And that mantra was believed so much, it was like on the bottom of Rulon Jeffs' shoes. They had their women sing. There were a couple of points in Trust Me where the women and the children were singing these songs. And from an outsider's perspective, if you're not used to the FLDS, that might have seemed like a little weird or a little odd, right? Because we don't often like break into song when we're singing about our husband. I mean, I don't, but we don't often just break into song about things. We do go to like worship services and we sing, but generally we don't write songs about our husbands, maybe not all the time. And so FLDS would often have these performances for the prophet, and it would be these women singing, women and children up on the stage, singing these songs about how they were keeping sweet, how they were being submissive, not in the healthy submission that we see talked about in scripture, but in a manipulative submission where women have literally no voice. In fact, they're encouraged to speak softly and sweetly. And you can kind of see this in even the FLDS women who were in Trust Me, who are Christine's friends now. And in the way that they speak is still kind of, the demeanor is a little bit softened, different than like how I'm speaking right now, right? So you are taught from birth, if you are a woman, that your place is to obey the men in your life, whether that's your brothers, your father, or certainly your prophet, but also the husband that the prophet assigns to you. Because that's the other component. Often in FLDS, certainly, the prophet assigns the wives to the husband. So if you are in better graces with the prophet, you get assigned more wives, maybe even younger wives, and so on and so forth. And so Samuel is really continuing that keep sweet idea of you're following into submission. He believes that it seems as though he has bought into that belief system. I don't know if he has diagnoses. I don't know what his own mental health capability is, because he comes from this group as well, right? So I'm not excusing any of his behavior, so I don't know what that. I know that from my husband's perspective, when he watched this with me. He is a psychologist, and he was like taking notes because he was like, oh, he's certainly exhibiting this kind of behavior, or exhibiting this kind of behavior. And so there were some signs for my husband very early on that something was off with Samuel. You wouldn't recognize that probably if you were in the FLDS. Maybe you would, but also certainly if you were a Samuelite who had been assigned to Samuel as your husband. So recognizing that the three men who followed Samuel also gave Sam their children, their daughters, and a couple of their wives as well. And so they believed that Samuel was this new prophet. And it seems like they bought into it wholeheartedly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. That's evidence of it. I mean, men would not be handing over their wives if they didn't believe this to be true.
Yeah.
They certainly had bought in and believed this to be true. And again, there was this window of opportunity. Not that it wasn't good that Warren went silent. It would be great if he remained silent in ways, of course, right? Like, we don't want him actually controlling people from prison. It just so happened that in their world, it allowed this window of opportunity for someone else to jump in. It's just how it works. So it's very difficult. These ones are really difficult for me to watch personally. There are overlaps with FLDS that I don't personally have across, the whole spectrum of groups that I've been involved with and become educated on. There are some others, of course, but this one just hits certain areas that others don't hit. And so these ones, they're unsettling in a very personal way, where I track with it of, yeah, I mean, this is how it goes, because even more so as women, we can't know anything. We don't know anything outside of what we're told. We're not questioning. We're not considering anything. We're not any kind of question, any kind of issue. I think one of the wives, same name as me, Naomi went by Gnomes. She spoke to this at the end. That was such a powerful moment, by the way, when she came on screen, like, oh, that really got me. And for her to share how she really had to put on this whole alternate personality, like she read what he liked and what worked, and then that's what she did. That's was the persona she took on. She's a survivor. Like, I know what that feels like, to be reading constantly, and the person shifts as well, because they speak to how some of the women spoke to how, they would have to act all great when Christine and Tolka were there, and then all of a sudden they're getting yelled at, as soon as they leave, and turning on a dime like that. And so you're just constantly like, what's going on with the weather, so to speak, and how do I need to shift and dodge and all of that accordingly. That was exactly what my life was growing up when my dad was home. And so you don't even there's no bandwidth, there's no capacity, there's literally no energy left for anything else. That is all consuming. Just trying to keep the peace. And I would get told that, to keep the peace. And it's like, we're not actually making any peace. We're just trying to not step on an eggshell is what we're trying to do. And so it just, capacity wise, if for anyone who kind of wonders, well, like, how do they not? There's the grooming, there's the indoctrination. It's all very heavy handed. And also there's just the exhaustion of trying to maintain the environment. And now we've put eternity at stake. I mean, it's all consuming. It touches everything. There was something, and because of this, and because of what you just spoke to a bit, Lindsey, in regards to the women specifically, I was wondering why. I don't know if you were able to find this information. It was difficult to see two of the women go to prison for a period of time because of that, just knowing of how they got to the point where they broke the law. and it making so much sense to me. I also saw how it helped them detox from the indoctrination, such heavy-handed indoctrination and abuse that they had been living in for an extended period of time. So I can see good that came out of it, and I appreciated how they highlighted that. I also just struggled with like, oh, it was hard to see. So I was wondering, I know that there were some others who also had gotten into some trouble, and just did you find anything about what the deal was there?
Yeah. So, well, breaking the law is breaking the law, even if in some cases you're coerced to do it,
Yeah.
right? So there were several wives who went to jail or prison. The two that were featured in the Trust Me docuseries, Moretta and Gnomes, both actually alluded to finding their freedom while they were in prison. At one point, Gnome said that she was placed in a cell next to Samuel, and he was like, "I've been in here for like a year," and she's like, "It hasn't been that long, dude." And realized like, if he's lying to me about something so simple, like what else is he lying to me about, right? Why did they go? So one of them was arrested for, well, actually, I think both of them. I don't know their exact charges. I feel a little bit like I don't want to invade. I recognize that they're on a docuseries, but there's still this line of like invasion of privacy that I feel like I want to respect, because they didn't necessarily ask to be part of the docuseries. They didn't really ask to be part of this group, right? They grew up in this group. This is their understanding of where they came from. And I don't want to continue to, it feels almost a little bit like, anyways, it just feels wrong to go too far into their lives now. However, they did, and it looks like it's primarily because they were held liable for kidnapping. Because if you watch the series, there was a scene where Samuel's pulled over, and it's because there are 3 underage girls in a trailer, like holding the door closed, which is just horrifying.
Terrifying.
But those kids were all taken into custody, and at one point, Samuel convinces the wives to physically remove the children from their foster home and take them to a different state. They did that, and they ended up having to go to jail for that. So obstruction was one of the, so that's maybe getting in the way of law enforcement trying to do their job. That there was a scene in the docuseries where I think it's Gnomes talking to Tolga, and she's like, "I threw the backpack outside the bathroom window, and it's got all this information in it. Do you think they're going to find it?" And I'm thinking to myself, like, yes, they're absolutely going to find that. But I don't know if she was held liable for that, but that would technically be obstruction. That's an example of obstruction. Coercing children, and this is the hard part, coercing children into sexual activity. So the older wives, some of them were held responsible for encouraging the underage wives to engage in sexual activities. And some of them are like, I encourage you not to read the details. Some were alluded to and referenced to in the docuseries, but thankfully not all of them. It is horrible. Anyways, I'm not going to go into detail, but it was horrible. And so the wives, then some of them were held liable for those situations. That said, we have to recognize again that this is the group that they grew up in. I do find relief, like you mentioned, that at least in the cases of Moretta and Gnomes, there was some freedom found in prison, and they were sort of released from the shackles and bondage that had been holding them for years. Moretta's mom, as far as I can tell, is actually still active FLDS, but it seems as though, she appears to be active FLDS. But remember, FLDS is different than the Samuelites, right? There are a few wives who still follow Samuel, and they're still connected to him. But for the most part, I think most of the wives are either out of prison or they're serving their time and they will be out. That's an unfortunate side situation that those of us who like seek justice and mercy, right, which is a biblical thing, we recognize the need for justice, but at the same time, like, come on, right? In this case, though, children were kidnapped and taken across state lines, and there clearly was obstruction. And then that whole coercing your younger wives to have sex with this guy and other men, also not acceptable. And so that's kind of why there were some legal ramifications for the wives, even though one could certainly argue that they had been coerced into all of this themselves.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that follows. And thank you for connecting some of those dots, because the kidnapping part I knew because of the two women who then, chose to be on screen at the end and kind of show some of the after. But I had not caught the coercion part of what was going on.
Yeah, that was in my side research. It wasn't really mentioned in Trust Me.
Okay. Yeah, that, because I know that they had said at some point in it that others were. I'm like, oh, what did they do? So yes, there just has to be. And we can say, okay, yeah, there's consequences with compassion and with understanding and with hope of them receiving proper support to process what was incredible, intense trauma themselves, which will then include how they then perpetuated harm while they were in that controlled state. And that is a very difficult walk to have to walk. It's a very difficult journey to go on when we see, gosh, I was maybe not only complicit, of course, but I furthered the harm. I was an accomplice to the harm. And yet I really thought I was doing what I was supposed to do. And that is, again, it's really complex for someone. And so I am hopeful that they will get support for that, and they will truly know what forgiveness looks like, and that they can move forward outside of that whole mental and emotional state that they were, again, groomed for.
Can you talk, if you're comfortable sharing, Naomi, a little bit about, so the only thing I can compare it with is out processing from the military and to civilian life and what that might be like. But what would it look like for an FLDS member or a Samuelite to then be forced, not forced, but to out process into what for lack of a better term, Gentile world, right? Which they've already been sort of groomed to think against, and to have negative feelings toward certain governmental structures or even the world outside of their small world. What does that look like for, I mean, obviously everybody's different, but for somebody who's making that life shift from such a closed off group to now I'm living, I think they're both, the two that we're talking about are still actually in the crick, but having a life as a Gentile, what does that entail?
So that like the actual transition kind of from one to the other. Well, I'm trying to think of what I'd want to highlight about it, because it certainly entails a lot. There's two different approaches. I'm like, as a survivor or as a professional. And so I'm kind of
either, I mean, even for our Christian listeners, like, how do we, if we are coming along someone who has been through something like this, what can we expect as their life adjusts to the outside world?
It can look like a few things, and this may not even be exhaustive. Sometimes someone will do a total pendulum swing, and everything will look and seem just totally different, which can give the impression that somebody's fine, that they're out, they're fully out. And that doesn't go well in the long term, because there's a lot underneath what it appears like. And it may even really feel internally like freedom and like a break, like, oh my goodness, I'm free. If we haven't yet done the disentangling work, our nervous systems are going to require a good amount of time as well for them to, for our nervous systems to rewire and to be able to also kind of find a new state of calm and how we function, because we've come from an environment that was a really high activation state, right? Like, it's not like we're calm and our nervous systems are really healthy, and we're not. And so there's just physiological time that is going to be required. So when we see someone do kind of the big pendulum swing, I don't personally read that as, oh gosh, they're like really out, this is amazing. I'm like, no, this is a step of what will be many steps for them to reach a state that is hopefully going to really have like a sense of wholeness and integration and richness and depth for them in how they live their lives moving forward. So we can also see people who, like how you had mentioned, appears to still be FLDS. Maybe not, because there can be some things that we're more comfortable letting go of than others. There can also be some things that we just care more about letting go than others. I know people who have come out of holiness standard related groups, and they continue not to cut their hair and they continue to wear long skirts because it's just what they've always done, and they don't believe you have to anymore. They just don't really care. It just isn't really so much like a thing for them. It was never really an issue for them before. Like, it's just not really a priority. And there's others where you'll see them chop their hair and go buy pants like immediately. Right. And so, so there's some variation there. And sometimes it's connected with a stuck point from a relationship with God point of view. And sometimes it's just not, just what matters more to them. So it can be kind of hard to tell if somebody is still kind of mentally in, or if they're just, again, kind of prioritization. There are also people who will choose to continue to look a certain way because they want to keep a bridge between themselves and those who are still in, and they have found that maybe it can be helpful. So I've heard that from people too. And as long as it's not causing harm to them in the process, then, where they're putting on the clothes and mentally putting it on again as well, then it's totally fine to do that. So there's a variety of how it looks, and it really does require a relationship with someone. And of course, developing that relationship also takes time, which we see even with the, Christine and Tolga. Just creating that relationship takes a long time. So when someone comes out of something like this, though, there's such incredible changes that are available to us. There's this mix of being active and diligent in where we want to get to, while also settling in and recognizing that this is going to be a lifelong journey. And I recognize that for myself. Like, there are going to be different things that come up at different times. Things come up for me differently as my son hits different markers as he grows up, because he's reminding me, like, he and I are a lot alike in ways. And I just see how he responds to things. And I'm like, is that what I would have been had I not been in the environment I had been? Like, there's just different things that come up along the way. And so allowing that to be the case without thinking that we've been set back, or, we've lost the progress we've made, because that's so not true. So there's so much available to us, but again, kind of that settling in and not rushing ourselves. And something else I thought of, which may or may not really connect with what you were asking me, Lindsey, so my apologies if it doesn't, but I was thinking, as you were kind of explaining the perspective, that if we meet someone, we really can't rush them, is a part of what I'm saying too. And it's more of what is kind of the thing on their minds or on their hearts? What is sort of the main question that they have right now? Or what is that next thing they're figuring out? Like, are they, a couple months ago, were they figuring out Easter? Or, it's getting hotter outside. Are they figuring out what they wear? Or are they saw the documentary come out and they're really working through a specific point that came up in that, or just a general sense of overwhelm, emotionally and cognitively. So being able to see what is kind of the thing right now? And sometimes I'll see people beat bop really quickly. Like it'll be this thing and you'll barely get to make a comment before they're saying the next thing, and you'll barely make a comment and they're on to the next thing. And it's like, you kind of feel like you're in a pinball machine. And that's because there's so much that they're thinking through, that they're processing through. And so that's totally fine. You don't have to stop them from doing that. But if there's something in particular where you're like, I have some, I can show up for you with this element, would that be helpful? Then, focusing there. We definitely can't, it's something where we zoom out long enough just to have an idea of goals and direction, but then we got to zoom way in, and we're talking like micro way in, because every little bit does start to add up. And then that freedom isn't just a pendulum swing. It's something they really get to hold on to because they really do land somewhere.
Thanks. That was like really helpful. I think especially coming from like, there are a lot of people talking about this docuseries, right? So it's everywhere. And actually, I think when we were talking about this, we were like, are we just jumping on the bandwagon? What can we have to offer that's different? And I think what's different from my perspective when we talk about this is that we're approaching it as Christians, but also we already have a ministry geared towards survivors and also family members and friends of people who are stuck in this kind of situation or similar situations, right? But it's helpful to recognize that every survivor needs something different, and their stories will continue to shift differently. And I think we even saw that a little bit in the docuseries in their adjustment to outside life. But we might, as outsiders, have this expectation that if somebody is not moving forward as quickly as we want them to, or changing their hair or changing their dress, that somehow like we need to force them to make those changes. But in reality, like we don't. And this is going to sound like a major plug for Be Emboldened, but I'm sort of on a kick, so I might as well just keep talking. One of the things I love about what Be Emboldened offers to survivors is that there are levels, right? So I don't have to get a mentor right now if I'm a survivor. Maybe I just want to read the blog. And I'm just going to learn from the blog right now, or I'm just going to watch the live streams or the videos or whatever, because that's where I'm at right now. But then I can move forward to mentorship. Whereas I might be somebody who needs a mentor right now. And so I'm ready to be mentored through all the issues that came from this religious abuse situation that I experienced. And I want help doing that. And so I think it's important for Christians to recognize, especially, that we can have these expectations that somebody should look a certain way or do a certain thing. And reality is that we're all kind of in our own process when we survive either church hurt or religious abuse or high control situations, right? So keeping, mindful of that is really helpful.
I have two thoughts. I'm going to pivot us a little bit too in that, because I had another question I know I had sent over to you. I was like, I don't know to deal with this. Will you please tell me, lawyer friend? Will you let me know? So I'll come back to that question in a second. But it's something that was also just because I don't want to run out of time and I just wanted to reflect on this a little bit. So welcome everyone who's going to listen to me verbally process this. But the timeline to me, there was something almost like Twilight Zone-esque about it to see, because when this escalated and then blew up was when my family was visiting and we were looking at relocating. Like we almost moved to Short Creek. And it was very hard for me that we didn't, because I have just a very deep love and care for the community there. And there were different barriers where it just wasn't coming together. One being like the housing options at the time were just all massive with, 10 bedrooms and bathrooms and 2 kitchens. And we're a little family of 3 who couldn't afford that. So there are just different things, again, that sometimes open up and God makes a way and sometimes doesn't. And so we ended up not going in that direction. But there was just something about that, like, oh my goodness, like this was going on. And his name sounded familiar to me. So I'm like, I feel like it was brought up by someone at some point while I was there. And I just wonder, those of us who we find out later that we were in very close proximity to something, and just what does it look like then? What are different ways that we can support? What are different ways that we can help, depending on what our skill sets are, what our resources are? And so that's basically what it brought to mind for me is how do we, what options do we have available to us? Doing the live stream, maybe reaching back out to the Dream Center there and seeing if there's an opportunity to partner and to help, depending on, what doors open and what don't. But I just wanted to throw that out to our audience for those who are like, gosh, I really care. What do I do with this? I am really adamant about not increasing the sensationalism. I have felt that since day one. It never helped me. It actually caused more harm to me. And I don't want to do that to others. And so I very much appreciate that shared ethic, Lindsey, and you saying, like, I'm not going to dig into what's going on with people now. Like, let's let their private lives be their private lives. They have gone through a lot. And so I completely agree with that. And that kind of segues into the other question that I had sent over to you. And I'm not asking this question having a position on it. I want to be clear with that because it is complicated. But I also didn't watch the documentary without having this question. And I think a part of that is, one, as a professional, just wondering the legalities of this. And then one, as a survivor of, oh my word, that would have been horrifying to have all of this footage gathered. No, the footage is being gathered. Like, there was permission. Now, could everyone involved actually give consent? No, they couldn't have all given consent. Now, with the documentary, we then see anyone underage, like their faces were swapped out, and I just really respect and
which is an awesome use of AI, by the way.
Yes.
That they were able to generate faces to protect, because it's not the same seeing a blurry face, right? It's not the same because you almost lose the human value perspective when it's a blurred face. So replacing their faces with AI generated images retains their humanness and allows us to feel what we should be feeling. So that was an incredible, I was like, oh my gosh, AI, right? And we have such a fear, I think some of us have a fear of where AI is going and where it's taking us. But this was an incredible use of AI, in my opinion. Maybe others would be like, this is horrible. But I thought it was really good because it helped us retain an image, even if it was AI generated, of a human face, to allow us to continue to remember that these are human beings that we're watching, not just blurred images.
Yes, and still have an age consistent face to help capture these are young girls.
Yeah.
And the other piece that I really liked about that was, I think it further confuses the brain for what they look like. So I actually think it hid them even more. Because we're not just like looking at an outline where you could plug something in. It's like, no, it's been plugged in for us. So our brain is receiving that as this is what they look like. So I thought that was like another layer of protection for them as well. And I also want to mention that Christine really was struggling with this in the end. And I saw that and I just really appreciated and just kind of resonated with that back and forth that she was struggling with, and just so much just compassion for her in those moments as she's navigating what to do and how to handle things. So, but with that, Lindsey, are you able to speak to the legality of posting the footage without having, I'm assuming, the consent of the overage women, which she may have had it for some anyway, like for example, the 2 women who then came on and gave updates and such. But how does that work?
So the laws are going to be different in different states, and even the United States versus other countries, right? And I am not a licensed attorney in all of the states. But from what I can tell, if a documentary serves the public interest, so it is revealing things that the public should be interested or aware of, like child abuse or criminal activity and whatnot. Generally, documentaries don't have to have the consent. So, a person who is making documentaries might not know that they're going to be documenting criminal activity. And you see a little bit at the beginning when Christine and Tolga arrive, they sort of get permission. I don't know what documentation they have, but it ends up being a moot point because they end up uncovering a lot of criminal activity that was happening. So because of that, we don't really need permission. And so there's that layer. The other piece is that generally you don't own your life story, which sounds cruel and heartless. But this is why we will sometimes get biographies that are they're not licensed biographies of celebrities because you don't own your life story. And so a documentary person can make a documentary about your life, Naomi, if they wanted to, because they can. Now, is that ideal? No. Do people like that? No. But as long as that documentary does not contain defamatory work, so as long as it's not a lie, right? As long as we're not just filming to make you look bad. So if that had been the case, we would have seen some lawsuits, I think, against Christine and Tolga. But we didn't see that. In fact, many of them are friends with Christine and Tolga at the end, right? And so I'm imagining, and having not spoken to Christine Marie myself, but alluding from her social media presence and some of the things she said in Trust Me, she's been, like you said, kind of this tug and pull, like, how much am I releasing? What am I doing? I'm undercover, and yet I love these people. Like, I love these women and these children, and I have a deep care for them. That's why she and Tolga moved to Short Creek, right? Because they had this, she has this overwhelming care for the people who live there. And she still lives there. They still live there, right? So all of that to say, it's totally legal. They didn't break any laws, as far as I can tell. And if you want to make a documentary, generally you don't have to get permission from people to do that. Now, I will say that oftentimes you do get that, right? You will get permission. I remember I was at a certain location in Waco, and they were filming a show, and we were just walking on the property. It was for like an HGTV show, right? And we had to sign a waiver that we might appear somewhere on this channel at some point. I was like, this is a very broad, like, waiver, because my face might appear somewhere at some point on this whole channel. Okay. And so I think we might get waivers generally nowadays, but you don't have to. It's not required.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. That makes sense. Yes. Thank you for clearing that up. I assumed that there weren't lawsuits, but I was like, gosh, is something going to come up after this comes out? Or yeah.
I imagine if it were, we would have seen that with, like, Sam probably would have.
Right.
sued. Yeah. I don't know that he would even have a cause to do that, because I think his permission came, like, verbally on video. So I'm not sure that, like, he would have a claim for that, but
right.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Naomi and Lindsey. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour here, and I feel like we've covered a lot of ground and hit the points of why we're talking about this and why, what approach Be Emboldened can add to the conversation. That's not just contributing to sensationalism or dehumanizing people. And so that is something that's really important to us. And I think that, Naomi, especially with your perspective, we can educate people on so that we do make those connections as consumers of documentaries like Trust Me, that we're not just consuming them for entertainment or promoting the sensationalism, but that we're seeking to understand that these are real people, real stories. And if you have the honor of walking alongside someone who's survived this kind of trauma, how to do that and how to be compassionate and present. So
I want to add that I think this is one of the best, it might even be the best documentary I've seen at doing just that. It really showed such genuine love and care and a desire to protect. And so it was a difficult documentary to watch. It was also a refreshing one to watch in that way. I really appreciated that it wasn't just data being collected. No one felt like a specimen. There just wasn't any of that. Like it was so genuinely relational. So yeah, I would love to meet them someday.
Same. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. We'll end with that, and we look forward to seeing you on our next live stream. But thank you for being with us today. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.